Welcome, Dr. Lakshmi Bandlamudi,
Thank you very
to
much.
this session called the AuroTalks, which has been designed by Sri Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research. As we told you, it is the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, which is supporting us to conduct this program. First, we came up with the idea of publishing a book called Sri Aurobindo and the World Thinkers. That's where I invited all of you to compare some theme, some major idea between two thinkers, Sri Aurobindo and someone else from the West or India. And you have chosen to compare Sri Aurobindo with Mikhail Bakhtin. Well, it's been the article that you sent us is a very poetic one indeed to suit the language of Mikhail. And of course, you have quoted profusely from Sri Aurobindo Savitri. I can see your love for the language. You have used a very poetic tenor all through. And of course, indeed, it's been a very poetic article, I must say, because other articles that I've received are more or less all on philosophy and psychology and all that. But yours has a different flavor about the whole thing. So I must congratulate for the beautiful article.
Thank you.
Welcome, dear. Well, Dr. Lakshmi, you have given a wonderful title, Mikhail Bakhtin, Dialogic Encounter with Sri Aurobindo. In fact, it's quite a summary of what you want to say. But I'm afraid for newcomers, we need to have a bit of clarification
Sure.
for this new word, dialogic encounter. Because this dialogic is a new word on our side of the philosophers, and especially the Indian thinkers. So, can you really throw a bit of light on what is this idea, the concept, definition
Sure.
of dialogic?
Yeah. Um,
Give us a little more understanding.
sure. First and foremost, Sri Aurobindo was a master of dialogic thinking. And why do I say that? Because uh, way before in the Western world, the word of dialogue, open-endedness, and all that became fashionable. Indian intellectual traditions always celebrated the dialogic angle. When you look at Bhagavad Gita, that is a dialogue par excellence. And that
Yeah,
is something that even if Sri Aurobindo does not use the word, they were very much in spirit and in philosophy. He was really very skillful, in that. And also, Kashmir thinkers, they negotiated the idea of difference, living in an open-ended world, all that much long before it became somewhat of a bit of a fashion in the Western world. So, in contemporary thinkers, Mikhail Bakhtin became the philosopher of dialogue, primarily in analyzing, literary texts, because literary texts are not just meant to do analyses, but rather you enter into a dialogue. And when you look at Sri Aurobindo's, even Savitri, your mother has always said that you don't just simply treat it as an analytical text. You enter that world, pick up whatever that you are able to pick up, depending on your receptivity. Engage in a dialogue with that, and so each time we enter, Savitri, or particularly Savitri, yeah, or any of Sri Aurobindo's works, you enter into a kind of a dialogic relationship. meaning that you're asking questions in your mind. You're trying to grasp the depth of that philosophy. Yeah. Actually, the the portion of my title is
Yeah.
Dance of Words Under an Open Sky on an Uneven Earth. The reason that I gave that title, and I was really thought quite a bit about it, is first and foremost, words dance in Sri Aurobindo's
Yes.
work. So that there is no doubt about it. But he was as much mindful of the open sky as he was of the uneven earth, because he was also very grounded. So one of the commonalities between Bhaktin and Sri Aurobindo was that they rejected this kind of Kantian, Immanuel Kant, and other philosophers of the Western tradition in that linear trajectory and transcendence of a certain kind. That was something that I did mention in the article. That even Sri Aurobindo, although it was the fashion when he was in Cambridge to read Kant and Hegel and other, he said he had no appetite for that. And that was clearly because it did not address the question of life. So that is where the dialogicality, yeah, because when you read even Sri Aurobindo's commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, he also enters into a dialogue.
Yes.
Along with Arjun, he's also entering into a dialogue. And that's the reason that it is so valuable when we read, his commentaries alongside what the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna.
Yeah.
So the dialogicality comes in many forms, and both these thinkers had celebrated a radical sense of open-ended world. It is so vast. So the kind of play of the universe that they cared very deeply about, not just simply analyzing things. And
Yes.
this is something that is very critical. And that's the reason I feel very strongly that Sri Aurobindo needs to be brought into the academic world in order to even grasp how to read a text, how to engage with a text. So, that is the dialogicality. Dialogicality celebrates open-endedness. When you read Mahabharata, Mahabharata is an open-ended text. And I take a phrase from Sri Aurobindo. He says, it is a text, it's from another poem, but it outmeasures space, outlasts time, right?
Yes.
So it is magnificent text. Um,
Dr. Lakshmi, you are defining this as in the context of a dialogue between, as you said, Arjuna and Krishna is a dialogue between. There's a tendency. The trend is there in India.
mhm.
But does Bhaktin use it in the same sense of dialogue, or as I see, he has used the word heteroglossia and then dialogic in a different sense. He says language in a dialogue with one another. That's why he says there are different strata, there are different things coming into language. And that's what I read about Bhaktin. But how does that come in? He says every language has got different strata, different things, trends coming into the language. There's no language, he says, if it's a political language, it has all the things of religion. If it's a religion, how do you explain that kind of a? That's a
No,
different concept, isn't it?
no, it's more than that. Actually, when you read his early works of philosophical work, he
Yes,
sets the stage for the dialogicality because the relationship between the creator and the created is
yes,
fundamentally dialogic. It should be dialogic because once you give life to the hero, your own created hero, the hero cannot be muted. The hero is not a mechanical mouthpiece in which the author pours in the ideas. So that's why I refer to even Savitri. Sri Aurobindo writes extensively, particularly in the letters on Savitri. He explains very clearly the creative process where he's waited for the arrival of the mother, and that is when the text was consummated, so to speak. Right, it becomes complete. The the texts don't become complete through our own efforts. Through the so even just to give from the Puranic text, right
Yes.
near Pondicherry, there is a place called Swami Malai. So Shiva, having created Skanda, given birth to Skanda, he yields, he defers to Skanda because Skanda says, I can explain Pranava better than you. So he kneels before his son, and that is a very beautiful, story. And so those are things that, in its own way, in Sri Aurobindo's works, in all his writings, in all his letters on yoga or evening talks, everywhere that I think the best insights we get when we read his letters on yoga or evening talks, because he's answering questions, and he's really dealing with innumerable topics. All those things are incredibly dialogic. Uh, you know,
Lakshmi, just sorry to interrupt, because I still want to know why or how does he use the word heteroglossia. I read a definition which says the concept of dialogism, we first need to understand the latter term heteroglossia. It refers to the circumstance that we usually think of as single unitary language actually comprised of a multiplicity of languages interacting with each other. Multiplicity of languages.
yes,
So he's gone on purely on the philosophy of language, where he says each language has got an intersection of other levels of, he says, strata, other levels of languages.
that's
So it's
very
a multiplicity of languages.
true.
That's what Mikhail Bakhtin says. Of course, even though you have explained it very beautifully and very clearly, but for me, even this question of the heteroglossia and dialogism of Bakhtin is on the level of language, is
Mhm.
not very clear. I mean, I really need to explain to you because I'm a
Sure.
newcomer to this idea.
Fair question. Um, the one difference between the Western world and in the Indian
Right.
text is language is an aspect of goddess Saraswati, right?
Ah,
Vatu.
exactly.
So language by its own nature will diversify. Followed because Bakhtin would say that because it is then governed by the goddess herself. So language by its own nature is bound to diversify. Whereas in the Western world, even including Bhakti, it is through that cultural intervention. So it is
Uh-huh.
not that language in and of itself. In his letters on poetry and art, Sri Aurobindo clearly says language is like a queen. The language has its own caprices and its own laws, and you can make hay out of it. I'm just giving you sort of
Yes.
a broad quotation. And so, what that means is that he recognizes, from the intellectual traditions of India, that language is an independent entity, that automatically diversifies because that is the nature of the goddess. So we have Shabda Brahman, right? Akshara Brahman. That Akshara Brahman and Shabda Brahman, they automatically diversify. That is their very nature. Followed. Whereas in the Western world, it is through that kind of an intervention. So although he treats the language and dialogue as a way of engaging with the Christ, in the early philosophical writings. We need to understand one thing. Although both Sri Aurobindo and Mikhail Bakhtin lived through the most tumultuous period in their respective cultural histories, um, Bakhtin practically had a gun to his head. They
Uh-huh.
were imprisoned. Both of them suffered imprisonment.
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
Bakhtin lived through very difficult times. So when he wrote the book on the author-hero relationship, art and answerability, it was really from coming from a spiritual tradition. So, and that spirituality he could not openly state it.
Uh-huh.
That Sri Aurobindo was able to do that on coming to,
But
so
he
that's
could not, Bhaktan could not say openly spirituality because of the religious circumstances.
There are circumstances where he was sent to jail. The Stalin
Ah,
era was very, very brutal, no doubt
yeah.
about it. And therefore, when that kind of, and all the members of the Bakhtin circle were shot dead. Another
Mm.
important thing that I like your viewers to know is there was one member of the Bakhtin circle who was an expert in Indo-Tibetan philosophy. So I know, when I was doing research on Kashmir Saivism in Benares Hindu University to work on my book, Kamlesh Datta Tripathi, a very well-known Sanskritist and philosopher, he would always say, Bakhtin must have been an old Indian soul reborn in Russia, because you do see a tremendous amount of that kind of an so-called Indianness,
Oh,
because we already have a tradition of dialogicality. So it's not difficult for us to embrace his, thinking.
yeah. Now I think it's clearer. There's another point which you mentioned right in the beginning of your article when you're quoting Sri Aurobindo's Savitri.
Uh-huh.
That is what he said. Both these thinkers cared as much about the open ended and unfinalized airspace as they were faithful to concrete ground realities. This is a kind of a very beautiful statement and very true.
Yes.
But I just want to say in Bhaktin, of course, in Sri Aurobindo, I can imagine how he was very close to earth and wanted the earth to transform, etc. But where do you find that in Bhaktin? In which literature or in what way do you find his closeness to earth?
You
Of
know,
course,
that's a very good point. Actually, throughout his writings, you do find that kind of an earthboundness, because he did. That is one of the reasons that he did not care much about the Kantian transcendentalism or the
mm,
Hegelian kind of a trajectory, because it had nothing to do with life. See, one of the most important thing is that he talks about art and answerability. That
yes,
means art cannot just remain lifelong and not touch life. Life also has to ask questions about art, and life cannot be, untouched by art. And art also has an obligation to answer to the predicaments of life. That
mm,
is where the dialogicality comes in. So he throughout his works, that is the very core of Mikhail Bakhtin also, and that's why this project was very exciting for me to, because I want to tell your viewers that to me Bakhtin and Sri Aurobindo, they are not someone who feature in my bibliography. They are part of my biography. I live with them. They live in my mind. They coexist in my mind, even
understand.
coming from different time periods, or not so much time periods, but different cultures. But that is where I find the fascinating kind of intersection where they're able to have a conversation. But
Yeah,
I also make the point the number of genres that Sri Aurobindo experimented with and wrote in is an ocean. There is no way comparison on that front.
right.
That's why I said he makes the words dance. So Bakhtin was a literary theorist, but was basically a philosophical anthropologist at heart. So that
Right.
means he was interested in the relationship between text, self, culture, and history. Right? So they all intersect. So that
But
is
can you, is there any specific work or article or essay? Because just as you find in Sri Aurobindo this close relevance and love for the earth, in Savitri especially, because the whole of Savitri is a symbol for that. Do you find any such essay in Bhaktin where we see his love for the earth and not the transcendental, as you said?
throughout for the
Specific work.
yeah, actually throughout. It's not just one specific work. So his
Uh-huh.
early work, philosophical works, one of the earliest works is Philosophy of Act. you know so there you find a lot of parallels between Sri Aurobindo and
Okay.
Bakhtin, because one of the things that he always, his famous works were on Dostoevsky, the Russian thinker, the Russian writer. And so he regretted so much that he could not write about what the perennial search for Dostoevsky was. And that was the search for the Christ. What is the nature of relationship with Christ? Right. So, in that sense, he's always calling for grounded peace.
Oh.
The grounded peace means what is achievable, because there are historical constraints, there are cultural constraints. That's why I use the word uneven earth. The earth is not all that, it doesn't give you a smooth ride. He talks about the grounded peace. He talks about any kind of a reconciliation is not out, should not be out of complacency, but rather it must be out of trust, out of love, and out of understanding the limitations of the earthly life. Um, that was very critical for him. And that was one of the things that he did not adhere to the kind of a Marxist paradigm. And that's why all these Russian thinkers, their works were banned, and they were tormented and brutalized and killed, and very horrible things happened in their lives.
That's what you mean by your first question here. What does it mean to live in an open and diverse world? And how does one enter into dialogic relations with different others? Open and diverse world, what does it mean?
Open
You
end,
said,
nothing is sort of very finalized. Nothing is sort of very bound. When the Savitri is an open text, open means each time we read, there is something new that we discover, depending on our own growth. It is not like from a beginning to the end kind of. Yes, there is a technically a beginning and an end, but it is a constantly evolving text because of our nature of our dialogic relationship with the text. We are finding new things. We discover new factors. We discover new. We might read the same, like, because I was trying to prepare for our interview today. On one of my favorite, the word of faith, in Savitri, or the soul's choice and supreme consummation. Something about that eternal day, book 11. I find it, each time you enter that, every, phrase, you find something new, you discover something new. That is the reason that they last so long. He's not just an interpreter of text. He has
yes.
written, he has authored so much,
Yeah,
and
that's
that
what I
is
wanted to
very,
know.
yeah.
And I wanted to bring out your beautiful image of the dance here, which you started with. And then you went on to the Chidambaram and all of the real in India, the concept of the dance and the supreme Chidambaram. And I think even Bhaktin tells a lot about dancing.
Yes,
I like this his definition in dancing. My exterior visible only to others, and existing only for others, coalesces with my inner self-feeling organic activity. So this is where he also brings in the inner and the outer together. So that
that
was a very close comparison with Sri Savitri
very
and
true, very true. And that says something about the dialogicality. In dance, it's a very complete art form, right? That's why I brought in Chidambaram and Shiva, because it involves all forms of art forms, and our entire body, from the top to bottom. And it is a finite entity, but it represents the infinite. And more importantly, what I cannot, and Bakhtin writes a lot about this, what I cannot see, right? I'm incapable of seeing my own face without a mirror. So, like that, we are all the time, we cannot get a complete view of our world. We need the other. I cannot see my background, right?
Mhm.
We can't see our interior. All that creates the necessity for the other. And that is why dialogue is an epistemological necessity. We cannot transcend our solipsism. We are always located in a specific place at a certain time, at a specific time. And therefore, that receptivity, even Bakhtin writes a lot about that receptivity, yeah, where even Sri Aurobindo writes about, I had no idea about supramental world at all. And then mother arrived, and then the text started dealing with those, and he repeatedly says that throughout his letters on Savitri, yeah, that you have to open yourself up. Receptivity is the key word. That inflow. So even when you speak to like artists, dancers, if they have to be representing the god,
Yeah.
that's what happened. I mean, recently I was listening to this Arun Yogi Raj, the sculptor of the Ramlala in Ayodhya. He also talks about the same kind of receptivity. The idol is already there in that
Right.
mass of stone. All I had to do is bring him out. And to do that, I had to sort of uh, uh, be ready to kind of envision that and bring him out. So that receptivity is something part of the creativity. So when but even Sri Aurobindo never talks about from the beginning to the end, and this is how the creative process occurs. He talks about constant evolution, even while you're in the midst of the work. These are all aspects of that open-endedness and dialogicality, because he's actually having a dialogue with Savitri, with the Supreme Mother. You know, uh, all that is, it is through the dialogue that he could write such a magnificent, a piece of work.
Of course, you have explained about the relationship between art and life. What do you say with Shoaib? Also, does art reflect life, or how does it impact life, or does it have an impact on life?
He,
Or
I mean, in his letters, he does say that the question is, it should impact, depending
it,
on the receptivity. Yeah, whether it all, if we are not open to it, it is only something that is entertainment. If we open ourselves up, it is internalized. So Sri Aurobindo also talks about the art and answerability. Yeah, not in those terminologies, but in his own wonderful way. He does. I mean, how do we make life divine? How do we make life on earth so divine? There has to be that receptivity. So he rejects this, that this is all an illusion, and only the sky
yeah,
is real. That is something that even to a different degree. See, we need to understand Sri Aurobindo is an architect of words. He played with words. He played with language. Bakhtin was not necessarily a poet. He was basically reading text, classic literature, Western.
especially novel. It seems he has done a lot of work on novel,
Yes, yes.
the different parts of the novel. Yeah,
This is a kind of an obsession with the Western world. They see the whole consciousness as the history of the novel. Evolution of
oh,
consciousness parallels the evolution of the novel. So they did not care much about the epic in ways that share the Indian intellectual traditions,
yeah,
celebrate. Our
yeah. And
is based on
one
the
thing I
epic.
wanted to maybe bring to your notice: relationship of art with sadhana. You see, to sadhaks,
Yes,
it's a different thing for a norm, for ordinary social life. There is an impact, or there should be an impact of art on life. But the place of art itself in sadhana
yes,
is
yes,
quite different.
yes, you're
And of
right.
course, it is important, but it is not given that kind of a, because it may boost our ego, and then the artistic ego comes in as an obstruction in the sadhana. So there's a little variation in that, differences.
I agree. You're absolutely right. Your
Yeah.
reading is very much on the top.
Yeah.
Although the compared to other branches of Christianity, Russian Orthodox Church is a very spiritually driven, thing. And so, unlike the evangelists or the even Catholics, there is a certain extreme, primarily even Bakhtin or even Dostoevsky did not care so much about the codified structure of religion, but they cared about the relationship with Christ. So, in all his literary works, when you read Brothers Karamazov and the Grand Inquisitor,
Yes.
all that will clearly point out about not the Christ of the church, but the Christ in your heart. That is really, but remember, Bakhtin or anyone, they could not write about it very explicitly because uh, they needed to live. They could not, and that is the reality.
So, Dr. Lakshman, one more point I wanted to bring
Sure.
to your notice. In one of the middle of your essay,
Hmm?
you have dealt with the different levels of poetry. That's on page 7, if you have the hard copy with you.
Sure. Uh-huh.
That's on page 7.
Uh-huh.
Uh, in short, the last line says, in short, Aurobindo insists on a dialogic exchange
Mm-hmm.
between the inner force of the writer and free flow from external and higher sources to create that wonder in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But this is at the end of the different levels of poetry that you've dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this exchange between the inner force of the writer
Mm-hmm.
and the free flow from the external and higher sources. What
Mm-hmm.
are these higher sources? Is it the higher levels of poetic
No,
creation?
higher,
Or
when I say higher forces, we're talking about divine force.
aha, you meant
Divine force entering, whether it is divine force or a civilizational force, all that is very critical because we are not, everything is not so bound. Our mind doesn't just simply say, begin and end with this. It is there is a certain vastness. The bodily topography is a cosmic topography. Yeah. And therefore, when he says about receiving from the higher force, that is very important. I think he says that very clearly in, I think I cite it here, because the higher force is absolutely critical. So that is where, as you earlier mentioned, sadhana, receptivity needs to open up. Even
yeah.
in triple transformation, he writes about that, right? Because generally there is an opening, but as it goes deeper and deeper, there is tremendous resistance. Our body is refuses,
Right.
and that comes only from sadhana. And so,
Yeah.
even creative endeavor, you are not the sole through your own efforts writing to think that you wrote it is a myth. That is what he's saying. That it needs to have both the internal force and the external receptivity, higher force.
My observation is that don't you think the word dialogue or dialogic exchange itself, in the from the point of view of Aurobindo, it's a bit an outer communication. The dialogue is a kind of a verb. It becomes a verbal or oral using language. Whereas this kind of what you have written here could be, and I would use the word communication because communication is silent, could be non-verbal, non-oral, no language required. So here in spirituality, a silent communication is what perhaps spirituality wants to have instead of because you mean the word the dialogic same, but for a reader, the very fact that dialogue means we're having a conversation, an exchange of words between two persons, between me and the other. Am I right in that?
Actually, it's not. I would say dialogue is both interpersonal, like the way we are engaging right now, and there is also intrapsychic dialogue.
That's the.
Intrapsychic dialogue. So
I think.
even in that silence, and even Bakhtin writes a lot about silence. The same
Oh,
way the word has meaning. That's a whole core of in the Grand Inquisitor, in Brothers Karamazov. So there is the intrapsychic dialogue, and but the Indian spiritual traditions have enhanced that silence. They have written so much about silence. because the exhausted word must dip into silence. Otherwise, things cannot.
Exactly.
Right, it needs to take rest in that in order for it to get rejuvenated. So you're right in the sense of dialogue is not a mechanical, like a kind of a conveyor belt
Right.
required to, it doesn't work that way. Yeah, that is not what neither Bhakti nor Sri Aurobindo.
Exactly.
Uh,
So
what it is,
you
go
use a beautiful word, intra-psychic communication.
intra-psychic.
That I think I don't think you put it in an article anywhere.
I
I've
guess.
not found that.
Okay.
I
In
mean, sorry, maybe you have used it, but what I mean that has thrown a lot of light
yeah,
in my observation that intra-psychic is what we are discussing. Maybe you could put in a line or two somewhere to clarify this dialogue because I'm an outsider, you see, so I'm giving you a view that all the time this dialogue means exchange of words and communication, and as you said, an automatic belt of communication. But this word that intrapsychic adds all that you want to say about the silence, going deeper than silence.
absolutely.
Maybe you use that word; it's very beautiful, actually.
Yeah, sure.
Very well apt, actually.
Yeah,
And you have brought in this Savitri's line about fate and death. In what context did you discuss that fate and death? You have got where Savitri says, "I'm stronger than fate," and there's a line there.
because um, death is not ultimate finality. That even Bakhtin would say. Yeah.
Ah,
And Sri Aurobindo points that out. Because she is actually engaging in a dialogue with death itself.
yes, yes.
Through that dialogue, she triumphs over death and recovers Satyavan or Satya, truth. So, in order to uncover the truth and to make sure that the truth is not going to die a final death, you have to sort of to bring the contrast with Sri, Mikhail Bakhtin. One of the in the Russian literary traditions, the comparison between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky is a very significant one. In Tolstoy, the death is final. That's it. Whereas in Dostoevsky, there is no death from within. There is only death from outside.
Yeah.
Right. So what? See, that comes from my idea that even you have to have a dialogue with death or with fate. In Sri Aurobindo in book two, canto two, he says the cosmos is no accident in time. There is meaning in each play of chance. There is freedom in each phase of fate. So fate and other things may be beyond our control. They may be workings of the higher power, so to speak, chance, fate. But having a dialogue with fate is an assertion of the human agency and human power. So we are not puppets in the hand of fate, that is just simply, that would be tamasic surrender. So even Bakhtin writes about the history of the novel. The very ancient form of a novel is the characters feel that they are beholden to the works of fate, chance, and destiny, and all that. That would be, Sri Aurobindo calls that as the tamasic surrender. God is not a puppet here. You know, I mean, even when we read his commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, see, here radically there is a shift, right? From Ramayana to Mahabharata. The Nar and Narayan are not the same. In Ramayana, they are the same, but in Mahabharata, it's different. But he sanctioned the agency, Arjuna. He has to fight the battle, and he needs to decide what is the Dharma Yuddha and not a Dharma Yuddha.
This, in fact, coming back, you you use the word dialogue in Savitri and death. Of course, we have also seen that even Sri Aurobindo may be using dialogue between death and Savitri. But here, can we use a different word than dialogue in the sense of dialogic? Because, as you said rightly, and it's an internal communication, it's an internal um, exchange or conveyance. In this sense, what I want to say is because they're not doing it actually, Savitri and death is more a eternal communion. So the language is given by the poet, but there must be something more. There is a different level of an exchange that's happening between Savitri and death. It's not the logic of the mind, it's not the reasoning of the mind that we see in depth. So, and yet the poet in this Savitri uses purposely powerful language and emotional language and a very inspirational language. So the word dialogue, I'm not able to find out the better word, but although this discussion maybe, well, discussion also means a dialogue, but there's a communication wherein I feel death is giving a kind of a logical, rational reasoning. That could be the part of dialogue where this logic and mind comes in. But Savitri is not using the mind. She is kind of transferring truths, intuitively caught ultimate truths. Oh, अरे अरे क्या नाम है विपुल ये कुछ गड़बड़ हो गया उसका निकल गया her image is
I
gone.
can hear you.
You can see me?
Yeah, I can see you and hear you. No problem.
Well, I can't see the image at all.
You can't see me?
That's why it's gone blank, the screen. ये कुछ I think निकल रहा है. There you are. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's perfectly all right.
So I was telling you that yes, death is giving a rational, mental, I would use the word now, mental communication. Whereas Savitri chooses not to be mental. She is speaking from a different, she is
Right.
communicating from a different level. So it's a very strange bit of it. Here, the word dialogue that you have used in both senses can be applied. One, the death is applying dialogue, Savitri is giving that internal psychic exchange. That's a beautiful combination of both the senses, the inner and the outer.
That's right.
So I think I was also ruminating after I read your article. How do we put really Savitri and death together? That was a good clarification. And I think your last sentence speaks a lot. In sum, what mattered to Sri Aurobindo and Mikhail Bakhtin was interior truth and internal freedom. A very beautiful ending, but yet it requires a little bit of explanation. Interior truth and internal freedom. Is it the same intensity with both, or there is a shadow of difference between the two?
I mean, there is bound to be some sort of the levels on which they operate might be slightly varied, but both cared about that interior truth because it is coming from that. Um, they really emphasized quite a bit about the uh, personal growth. They both had no patience for this exteriority of the virtue. They cared about, see, when we look at even with the freedom movement, what Sri Aurobindo wanted was a transformation, not what is just sort of really idle kind of an declarative political statements.
Yes,
He wrote
yes.
a lot about politics, but his emphasis was very, very different than Gandhi or anybody else. No doubt about that part. So similarly, even Mikhail Bakhtin cared a lot about the evolution of consciousness, that interior truth. And to go back, since I mentioned, Shiv Sutras, it says Rango Antaratma. The self,
Yes.
Anartha Atma, Rango Antaratma. So we cannot deceive our inner being. You can just cover up many things, but you can't deceive this. And that deception is what. So that's the free. And secondly, internal freedom. And my reading. I mean, of Sri Aurobindo's. Initially, he started with the freedom, independence for the country. But then he went on to talk about the internal freedom of the individual, the consciousness, that growth, and that is what he is talking about. Internal freedom means that there are many compulsions, like Abhinavagupta, Sanskrit, Kashmir thinker. For him, the main thing is about swatantriya. The whole engagement with text and with aesthetics is really swatantriya. Swatantriya is not just simply, as it happens very often in the Western world, I want freedom to do this, I want freedom to do that. That is not freedom in the way that Sri Aurobindo talked about. We are really talking about, we have all kinds of avastas, we have all kinds of psychological compulsions. We become prisoners of our own making. And to free ourselves from that, and to liberate and to get onto a higher plane, that is what is very critical for both of them. And
Yeah.
that's how I kind of enjoy that. And in many ways, these are things that other spiritual leaders have not dealt with in the manner that Sri Aurobindo has dealt with.
Yeah.
That is what makes him so unique and so remarkable. He not only is a commentator of many texts, but he has written so many texts,
Hmm.
both in the poetic form as Savitri or a prose form as Life Divine, or as a conversational style of letters or on. So nothing remains unanswered by Sri Aurobindo. I mean, how many volumes we have? It is astounding, actually. And that's what is critical.
Is there any remote chance that Bhaktin could have read something of Sri Aurobindo or his writings?
That's a good question.
1975, you see, he passed away in 75.
Yeah.
Not long back, by that time, Sri Aurobindo's all his volumes
That's
and books
true.
were out.
I'm not sure. There are no indications of it.
Uh,
But he might have. See, remember, many of his uh, notes are just scribbled notes, and we don't know whether they're lost or whether they're, even available. But this much I know, that Mikhail was a specialist in Indo-Tibetan, you know, uh, uh, thinking. And so there must have been, into a circuitous that Indian thinking did enter his system. And I think one of the things that I did not touch on the article at all was on laughter. And I've been now reading quite a bit on, Sri Aurobindo's, particularly the fourth volume of Letters on Yoga.
yeah,
Right? There he talks quite a bit. And even in his Sapta Chatushtaya, he talks about Hasyam, and one of the lines that I like in this is that it is God's stamp and seal on the Siddhi of Samatha. That is
yeah,
the line that he uses in that. So he also sees laughter on a very high plane. you know,
right.
that even Bakhtin has written a whole volume on Rabelais, yeah? Laughter, carnival, uh, uh, all that is really, very, very uh,
Yeah.
precious.
Okay, my last question would be, Dr. Lakshmi.
Yeah.
You see, a person who has left his body in 1975 and, of course, written much earlier, has he had any impact on the world of literature, both in the East and West, or it was mostly to the Russian influence, impact of the Russian audience?
No,
He's a
ever
little
since,
pretty
ever,
world thinker, so
yeah. Ever since his works got translated into the English world, and I was a graduate student exactly at that time, and that's why for more than many decades I've been part of that Bhaktian, world. So once it came out, it became popular. But I have to tell you that it is not so easily embraced. Why?
ah,
Because people like Gramsci or Marx and others, it's a very politically charged, hierarchical organization, whereas Bakhtin requires you to relinquish that, and to be able to see the world through that kind of we might call as a human avastha, the human condition. Um, that is exactly where we are, the present day, I would say, the crisis in academia or in the world in general. We are we are talking too much about exterior freedom and independence and all that,
True.
political rights and all that. We are not willing to kind of engage with some, literature, the human condition. All that is really on the back burner. And that's not very healthy at all. I don't think we'll be able to find even solutions to these really messy, murky problems of the world when we are not equipped with the tools.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing with Sri Aurobindo too. I mean, of course, he wrote his works 100 years back, but still there's a bit of a non-receptivity on the world scenario.
That's right.
It's going very slow, but the only hope, and one of the things that I had in mind when I started this project was, Sri Aurobindo always writes about a growth of evolution. The pattern of evolution goes from the individual to the collective. Somewhere there's an intensity of an idea and a thought and consciousness, then it becomes an extension of his thought. It takes time, of course, long this series of generations.
Yeah.
So why I value all these thinkers that you have compared, you and others. So I'm finding those individual thinkers, those bright lights, which have caught Sri Aurobindo directly or indirectly, doesn't matter, but at least I would say the new consciousness.
Absolutely.
The new consciousness that has come down, it is spreading itself, and those who are receptive in the world, be it anywhere in the West or East or Russia, so those are the individuals that it is selecting to spread its own thought. Because down this program, I see many individuals have caught Sri Aurobindo on different levels: social, political, psychological, philosophical, and all converging somewhere or the other on Sri Aurobindo. So I cannot but relate it to the new consciousness which he brought down long back, which all of us know. So that is somewhere selecting individuals, and there's somewhere the society, the future of humanity will be guided, but they want to find the individual souls. So in that line, I think Dr. Lakshmi, your essay has been wonderful, and then we have learned a lot because.
Thank
But my heart is really happy to see that how Sri Aurobindo's vision and word are being caught. If not on the sadhana level, but the mind level, the thinking has to go first. And that's where we have been, wonderful. And it's a happy thing that you one day chanced and walked into Sakar, and then we caught you for that. So it's a really a godsend thing. Somewhere it's not an accident, but obviously, yes.
Obviously.
Very many thanks for that.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Dr. Lakshmi. It's been a wonderful clarification.
Such an honor.
The idea is to make it easy so that when we put it online, people understand more about Bhakti and Sri Aurobindo.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much.